It was a quest for ownership of the mind, ownership of truth, ownership of reality. So much so that the Chinese over-reformed. The Chinese communists came in as heroes. They had won a revolution, a heroic long march, and they were looked upon with enormous respect by much of the population when they arrived, but they had a religious-like impulse to reform and couldn't stop reforming in various ways, and for that and many other reasons involving corruption, changed from one of the most powerfully supported regimes to one of the most corrupt on the globe. In any case, what I learned from studying Chinese communist thought reform, I knew wasn't limited to them, and I tried to apply it to my own country, beginning with its application to the McCarthyism of the 1950s and the efforts to control political life and false accusations, and many parallels that I found with Chinese communist thought reform. But one can look no further than the reality reversals of the Bush administration at the present, really looking at Iraq to start with and to finish with in terms of reversing reality when things are absolute chaos, as they are now, being presented as a success story in the democratization of the country. And similar things are done with domestic issues such as Medicare, jobs, benefits, and other issues of that kind. This kind of reversal of reality is more than just control of spin. It's again an effort at ownership of the mind or of reality control. I have to say, though, that reality is stubborn and it can't be fully controlled. There's a saying of Freud that's famous and often repeated in which he stated, "The voice of the intellect is a soft one, but it will not rest until it has had its hearing." One can say that the voice of reality is a soft one and will not rest until it has had its hearing, but the question is, how long must we wait, and at what cost for that hearing to be effective? My next study was that of Hiroshima survivors in 1962, when I lived together with my wife and infant son in that city for 6 months. I learned a lot about the psychology of survivors, or the phenomenology of survivors, wrote about them, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I also learned about the cruel new dimension of weaponry that posed its threat to human continuity and produced in all of us what I came to call imagery of extinction. I came to see the weapons themselves as inherently apocalyptic by their very dimensions. Remember that the weapons could do, we sensed, what in the past only God could do: destroy the world. And it's that quality, that dimension, that causes us to sacralize them so readily. We take it to be God's work in terms of the creation of the weapons, and if you read the early literature about the responses to the first tests and the first weapons themselves, use of those weapons, you can see this apocalyptic dimension and this sacralization of the weapons, and phenomenon I came to call nuclearism, a kind of near worship of the weapons to keep the world going. I did a study of Vietnam veterans in the early 1970s, and I learned a lot from those veterans, especially about what I came to call an atrocity-producing situation. That is, one so structured that ordinary people, no better or worse than you or me, can enter into it and become capable of committing atrocities. It is a kind of socialization to atrocity. In Vietnam, that atrocity-producing situation was created by certain military policies, such as free fire zones where you could fire pretty much at will at just about anyone, or body counts in which every body counted and was tabulated, and other policies, along with the angry grief of soldiers who were losing buddies and an impulse to get back at the enemy. In Iraq, we can see in Abu Ghraib prison and the atrocities there, we can see the Iraq version of an atrocity-producing situation. If you look at, and as different as Iraq is from the Vietnam War, it nonetheless has certain parallels. In both, you have a counterinsurgency war in an alien environment where much of the population is hostile and non-white. And you have difficulty lining up the enemy or identifying the enemy in any way, and yet it's very dangerous, and many American lives are lost. One can speak at Abu Ghraib in furthering this idea of an atrocity-producing situation of three levels of behavior. There is the nitty-gritty atrocity that you see in those images of in various ways humiliating detainees or prisoners, and that's done by the foot soldiers. You have another level of intelligence officers who sometimes give specific instructions in relation to that process connecting with interrogation and humiliation, or sometimes simply infer what's to be done and leave it to improvisation on the part of the foot soldiers. And then you have the higher level of leading military officers and civilian planners of the war who are intent upon justifying the war and exaggerate the value of interrogation or of finding those hidden secrets, whether it's of the psyche or the weaponry, via interrogation, hidden secrets that are not to be had because they don't exist, but nonetheless, in that way, create the atrocity-producing situation, which becomes inseparable from the war as a whole. And that's very much what we've had in Iraq as well as in Vietnam. In Vietnam also, I came to recognize a kind of apocalyptic dimension. You remember that image of destroying the village. We had to destroy a village in order to save it. That's writ small, a completely apocalyptic statement. Destroy to save. One thinks of the present operation against Fallujah now in similar terms. Are we destroying it to save it? It pretty much looks that way, doesn't it? In that way, to attribute Abu Ghraib to a few bad apples or to some aberrant kind of tendency on the part of a few people is in total violation of all evidence and of the nature of that war. Yet it's also true that I learned from Vietnam veterans the capacity of young men, and it was only with men that I worked with in the 70s in New York and New Haven, to change and change rapidly. Many of them underwent significant changes within a matter of months or even weeks, starting with their rejection of that war, rejection of dying or killing in that war, and their self-examination in terms of the war and in their lives. It doesn't mean they changed totally in that time, but their worldview could change, and much about them in very impressive ways could certainly change. It's also of some significance that those anti-war Vietnam veterans inspired other people in different parts of the world. I've been in touch with some people from the Courage to Refuse movement in Israel. That is, Israeli reservists who have fought for their country but refused to fight in the occupied territories. And they told me they were influenced by the resistance of the Vietnam veterans to their own war. And they've said this very movingly.